Welcome to another episode. My name is Amsterdam Comic Geek, and recently I showed you guys a couple of comics I've got from the comic book shop that I got for free, and one of them was SOS Support Our Shops. And I just want to talk to you about it a little bit. It's made by AfterShock. It's a new publisher. I think they started in 2015. And they basically made this comic for the comic book shops. So they're sending it for free to comic book shops, and the comic book shop owner can either sell it to customers or give it away or whatever they want. Of course, comic book shops are in dire straits because of the pandemic that's going on. And every story is by a different team, a different writer and a different art team. So most stories are dealing with how the comic book artists and writers came across comics for the first time in their youth and why they love comics so much. And there's a central role in every story for the comic book shop, because that's the place you usually find comics. It's, at least nowadays with the direct market. Of course, some people bought comics at grocery stores or other places because comics were readily available back then. But this story, for instance, by Colin Bunn is about how he's traveling with his parents, the main character, and every stop they made, like a grocery store or another kind of convenience store, he was looking for comics, and then a specific series. But of course, then he discovered he missed a couple of issues. And that's terrible if you're reading something that you love. And then he discovers a comic book store for the first time, Comics Adventure, as you can see. And that's like a whole different ball game than a convenience store. And that's when he finds the back issues he's missing. So he's a happy kid. So all these stories are basically celebrating the fact that there are comic book stores out there and how wonderful they are. Especially like this story, because the art style by Simon Kudranski looks great. Look at this. And what I like about this anthology comic, is that I get to know new artists I haven't seen before in comics, and sometimes new writers as well. And this guy discovers Spawn, so that's cool. And I really like his art style. It's really dramatic and realistic. This one is by Gordon Purcell. I didn't like the art that much on this one. It's more about his mom playing a part in his comic book collecting. But the story I really liked was this one by Jamie McKelvey and Rose Stein, and Ted Brandt does the letters. Or actually, Rose Stein and Ted Brandt do all the art duties here. And this is about a guy who learns about comic books through the series Sandman by Neil Gaiman, and how that changed his life and the way he reads comics. So I really like that one. I also like the art on this one. It's very expressive, but at the same time there's a lot of space for interpretation, if you catch my drift. And another one I really liked was this one by Jerry Ordway, and I want to show you the art because I really like Jerry Ordway's art. It's a classic style. I remember coming across his work for the first time when he did the comic book adaptation of the Tim Burton film of Batman back in 1989, and he has a lot of details, as you can see. But these pictures are like almost like photographs, but still lively. And he talks about people who really exist, so he probably used some photo reference, I suppose. But he came across a comic book store in the 1970s. This is what I especially liked in the story by Jerry Ordway. The camaraderie between him and other comic book fans meeting and hanging out at a comic book store. And when I grew up in the Netherlands, I grew up in a small town. There was one comic book store that sold Dutch translations of comics and European comics. And the owner was really not a nice guy. He was always grumpy and always complaining that we wanted a bag, a little shopping bag for our comics. And his employees were quite nice, but most of them didn't last long. I remember in my teens, Paul and a couple of other guys, we went to the comic book shop in the place where I lived, and it was nice to hang out when the owner wasn't there, just talk comics. And we did that at school as well, of course. But that's kind of the experience I'm missing nowadays, because there are a couple of comic book shops in Amsterdam, as I've mentioned before, but one of them is in downtown, and those comics sometimes are quite expensive because they have a high rent to pay every month. And the other comic book store I sometimes go to, he has a great collection of back issues. But that owner of that store, although he's a nice guy, he just talks your head off. So when you go into that store, you better be sure that you'll stay there for a couple of hours, because he'll talk a lot to you. But he's got good customer service. But I've never met a comic book store in my life that's as idyllic as some of the stores you see in certain kind of comics and or movies made by Kevin Smith, for instance. And I'm still looking for that kind of store. There is one in Haarlem, which is near a town near Amsterdam, but it doesn't sell single issues. So they sell a couple of trade paperbacks and a lot of European albums. And the owner is a nice guy, and also the guy behind the counter is Dimitri, he's called. He knows his stuff, and he knows comics, so that's great. It's great to hang out there every once in a while, but I haven't been there ever since the pandemic broke out. So I hope to get there soon. But they still don't have all the stuff I need or I want to read, so I buy a lot of stuff online as well. But that idealistic picture that's painted in a couple of movies and comics like these, I haven't experienced that yet in real life that much. But maybe you have a local comic book shop that you really love to frequent, and you buy all your stuff at. So I'm very curious about that. Do you have a local comic book store, and where you would like to hang out, and which one is it? You can tell me in the comments below. What I like about all these stories, though, is that when they were young, they came across comics once upon a time, one particular day. They fell in love with the medium, and now they are artists and or writers themselves, and carrying on the torch, so to speak, for the medium. And I think that's great, and I think that's something this anthology really gets across. So that's cool. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys at the next one.